Welcome to your Aged Care Compass podcast. Join us to find out how to support your older loved ones at home. We're going to help you make sense of Australia's aged care system. We talk about legal and financial considerations for ageing and how chronic health conditions impact your older loved ones' well-being. And we share real-life stories of where it went wrong for people and how we got them back on track. Welcome back, listeners. How to initiate that difficult conversation about moving an older loved one into residential care. It's a question we're asked from time to time. It's not my area of expertise, so I reached out to our guest speaker, Dr. Julie Bajic-Smith, to join us on the podcast today to guide us on how to approach this topic. Julie is a registered psychologist and has 15 years in aged care as a clinician and researcher. Her work focuses on the well-being of home care workers and decision-making in dementia. Julie's book, Beyond the Reluctant Move, enhances emotional well-being in aged care. As a board-approved supervisor, she guides intern psychologists and mental health professionals. Julie's award-winning programs significantly impact older adults and their carers, providing crucial support and practical solutions. Julie, my mum still lives in her own home and we're doing everything we can to support her to remain in her own home for as long as possible. But she's had a few significant health issues over the past 3 years, and I wondered each time if her care would be too high to remain at home. She was able to return home each time after those hospital admissions and is doing well now, but I realise her care may one day become too high for us to continue to support her at home. I'd feel sad and guilty that I wasn't able to keep her at home if it came to this. Is this a situation you find many families grappling with?
Hi, Coral. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. This is a very common issue and dilemma that a lot of people encounter as their loved one gets older and starts to experience challenges in late life. So the situation that you're finding yourself in with your mum is not uncommon.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what we consistently hear as well from our followers and listeners.
We must keep in mind that most people actually remain living in their homes, that it's only a very small population of adults who move into care. We're talking about 6% or so. So vast majority of people do remain living independently. I think sometimes a lot of people tend to have this fear that they'll end up in nursing homes. And the people who end up in care, the ones whose health declines significantly and whose risk of being or remaining independent in the community is just too high. So the challenge for families and loved ones is determining what level of risk they are prepared to maintain independence at what risk.
That's a really interesting comment from you. You know, in the media, the stories that we often hear are those crisis kind of situations where people have to make this really big decision and it's very traumatic and it's about moving mum into aged care. So that you said it's actually quite a small or a smaller number of people compared to the people who are still living at home. That really got my interest there because from where I'm sitting, an ideal in the home care space, not in residential accommodation, to me, I would have assumed that that number would have been much larger.
Yeah, see, that's the assumption often. And having been to a number of nursing homes here in New South Wales over the years, many people who move into care, the ones that don't have the family support, the ones that have no one to support them in their own homes, or maybe they've had a fall and they used to live on a second-story unit block, there's no lift, they can't navigate the stairs anymore. And it's not just about the stairs, it's also then, well, actually, even if I lived on the ground floor, no one would be able to assist me. So we don't hear often stories from people whose voices are not represented in our population because maybe
right.
have family members, maybe they've never married, never had spouses, maybe there's only a niece or nephew who have their own aging parents to deal with. So we don't hear the true representation. And I believe that a lot of your listeners who are so committed and dedicated towards supporting their and older people themselves have this fear, but also that they're so blessed to be surrounded by people who are supporting them.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, the other thing you just touched on was about risk. So the question I wanted to ask you now is, in your experience, what are the indicators that make family members supporting an older loved one at home consider that it's time for mum and dad to move into more supported accommodation?
So it comes down to their activities of daily living, their physical health, but also their emotional well-being. Some people might have the physical health in reasonably good, but perhaps they are not motivated to attend to activities of daily living. So maybe they are not showering and just making sure the floor is wet so that family will think that they've had a shower. Perhaps they're not eating properly and feeding themselves properly. And look, Coral, there could be a whole range of reasons as to why that might happen. So it could be because they might be having mild cognitive changes. Maybe they are experiencing some neurological changes, or it could be because of their mental health. And it's really hard to jump to conclusion as to what is going on. We know that with older population and older generations, we don't talk about mental health so comfortably. And a lot of older people might be in denial that they might have a mental health condition. So what would be happening is like, no, I'm not depressed, I'm not anxious, but not recognize that actually that is what might be going on. So a very important note is that although we know that we can't reverse the impact of dementia, we know that we can slow it down, but we can't cure people from dementia. We can cure people from mental health conditions. We can cure people who might have experienced grief and loss because they've experienced significant loss of their loved one. And maybe that manifested into depression. But we know that regardless of a person's age, that they can actually improve.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
When the family thinks about what risk and what factors they would need to see where their loved one might be requiring additional help and support, is obviously making sure that everyone's on the same page, but also making sure that are they eligible for service? Good talking to mum and dad about additional support and service if they're not eligible for residential care. And so what tends to happen is that sometimes people do become eligible. They do not want to move. I can understand. That's why my book is called Beyond the Reluctant Move, because people don't want to move there. In many cases, I've met a handful of people who are keen and willing to do that, to stay out of family's way and not impact their family's activities and lifestyles and feel like that they're a burden. But I think that the main challenge, Coral, is in people who might have additional needs, support needs, or they may have a diagnosis of a degenerative disease. And if it's impacting them neurologically and cognitively, what tends to happen is that these people lose the insight into their abilities.
Yes.
And so they are under the impression that they can do things independently. Yes, my daughter will come and top up the fridge and cook, but they can downplay the level of support that they are getting. And so what happens is that offspring goes on holidays or becomes unavailable suddenly. And then it comes to light, wow, actually, there's a lot of help that they're giving me. And it becomes unsustainable at one stage where it's like, well, no, if they're not helping me do this, I can't stay living independently. I'm not going to feed myself properly. I'm not going to chuck food that's been sitting in the fridge for weeks and weeks. I'm not going to go and get a new supply. And no, it's not okay for Meals on Wheels meal to last you for 3 meals in a day. It's supposed to be one meal. It's not to be split up. So it is about really determining what risk there is. And for some people who have cognitive changes, who have very little insight into what is going on for them, they might be like, oh, yes, I can do lots of things independently. But it's like you leave the stove on and your house goes on fire. Your front door is unlocked. You go wandering on the streets. So it's about mitigating that risk. And it's really hard because it can be quite subjective. And some families can be prepared to deal with a higher level of risk than others. So I think that a lot of that comes into play, and it really depends on individual circumstance and their support unit and their own insight and willingness to explore additional support needs.
Really, really interesting that you just spoke about insight and the level of care, because this is something I often speak about as well. And when I'm presenting to a group, I say it's a really difficult conversation. And sometimes, like you said, that lack of insight, the older person will say, I'm okay, I don't need any help. And I'll say, okay, let's talk about that. And then I'll say, well, my daughter prepares all my meals for me, so I just have to reheat them. And I pay a private cleaner. And when I go to my bridge club on Monday, Marge, the neighbour, takes me
Yeah.
because and there isn't that insight, that recognition that they are actually getting a significant amount of support already. And I always suggest to them, all right, we need to remove, let's just take all that support away. How would you cope at home? And that's when it can can reveal itself to the person that in fact they are getting quite a lot of support already, but that it's informal doesn't seem like support to them.
Absolutely. And then when you
Yeah.
peel the layers of onion, you realize, wow, it's amazing that this person has been able to
Yes.
keep doing for what they've been doing for so long, and just the level of support that they might downplay and think, oh, it's no big deal. But really, it is a big deal.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So look, on that point, Julie, how would a family member approach that perhaps initial conversation with an older loved one about, hey, mum or dad, you're needing quite a little bit of support, and I, as the son or the daughter, it's really hard for me, mum. I'm working, I'm exhausted. Perhaps it's time to consider moving into residential care. That's a really difficult conversation for people to have with their older loved ones, or in certainly what in our experience, that's what people always report to us. So how would someone initiate that kind of conversation, Julie?
I think that you're spot on, Coral. I think it is a hard conversation to have. It is very difficult for family members to accept that their loved one needs additional support. And it's hard to get that message across without touching on many emotions. It's not a brief conversation to have. I think that it's something that is likely to get people upset. We can't just assume, look, it's going to be a happy, brief chat. But I think it's something that probably evolves over time. And being clear in the communication, even when you are able to do things, to highlight that you are doing those things, I think is really helpful for the person to realize just about the level of support that goes into helping out. Not to say, look, I'm so burdened by what I'm doing for you, but just to say, look, mum, at the moment where things are, like, I'm probably helping 5 to 10 hours a week to maintain living at home. And yes, I can do this, but can we reevaluate this in 6 months' time and see how that's going with my availability and my commitments, and also for you? And if mum also has home care packages or supports in place, just to track along and see how that's going, as opposed to what I find, Coral, happens sometimes is that it's the non-spoken word for so long that goes on, and then the family gets to a breaking point and they're like, I can't keep doing this. And then the family member is like, oh, wow, I had no idea what impact this was having on you, or we didn't really talk about it. And then it's like, well, no, you need to move into care. And so sometimes there's really, I'll take a step back. There's two types of people that move into care. There's one where they've had significant change, like they've sort of had overnight events that have happened.
Yep.
And they may have had a stroke, they may have had a fall, they ended up in hospital, or they had some sort of event that, from being completely independent to requiring a lot of support, happened overnight. And usually for those people, it's really hard because they haven't had any time to adjust to that transition. But, if they end up in a hospital setting and it's like the doctors say, look, you can't go home, you can't mobilize, or they've had something happen quite traumatic. So those people don't really have a lot of say as to what they want.
Yeah.
And they end up in an aged care facility because they can't have a hoist at home, they can't return to that environment at all. The other type of people is the ones that have, they're called slow growers, or the changes happen slowly over a prolonged period of time. And it's really hard because technically it doesn't matter if mum moves into home today or next week or a month ago. And that can be really harder to know. Where do you reach that point when you go, yes, this is where we're getting. Right. And that's really hard because then that older person is hanging on to their independence. And the family member is like, well, what are you waiting for? There's room in this facility for you now. Why don't you go in? And I think that because that move signifies so much. It signifies so much for the older person. It signifies so much for the loved one. And we know that research shows that even when an older person moves into care, the immediate caregiver, their level of stress remains the same until the person passes away. So putting a loved one into care doesn't necessarily mean that your life is all going to be easier, because then you'll just have different concerns and worries. But I think it needs to be a collaborative approach and collaborative discussion, and looking at different facilities if time allows it, if there is vacancies, and having all parties on board. So I think having medical team on board, speaking to the GP about the support needs, talking to facilities and families makes it more of a team effort, as opposed to our daughter wanting to have mum moved into care. And also communicating about the rights and responsibilities of older people in care as well, that it will become their home, that they can personalize their rooms and how the care delivery will look like. And it doesn't mean the end of that relationship between a child and the parent, that they can focus on more fun stuff because someone else is going to be providing the care. And so that moving to care can actually enhance their relationship and their time together, because they now have this additional time that's available, that's free, because mum doesn't need to cook anymore and mum doesn't need to clean, and you don't need to clean all this. You can really have nice, fun outings and enjoy this later stage of your mum's life.
Yeah. Fantastic way that you've reframed approaching this situation. And in fact, I was listening to some of your own podcast episodes and noticed how you talked about reframing this kind of discussion, suggesting a more positive approach. You know, the guilt associated with moving mum or dad into care could be reframed to be supportive rather than reactive. You've touched on some of those points. Are there other ways or things that people should be perhaps considering that they could introduce into that kind of conversation that would be more positive and supportive rather than reactive and negative?
Yeah. Look, I think that it's really important to look at the positive side of things. And I think that often families can feel quite overwhelmed about that process. And so I have a really handy tool, which I actually started off with just like a blank piece of paper. And when I just started working in aged care, one of my mentors, Dr. Nancy Pahana, was saying about this, just get family to write down what's very positive about their loved one. And so I actually designed this resource that I'm sure you can link to your listeners from my website, 5 Facts About Me, and actually writing down what are the 5 things about mum or dad that the facility should know, and putting it in a positive way. Like, mum is a modest lady. She loves to have her cardigan over her shoulders, or it's really important that she has her cup of tea from her cup, and you'll find it here. Or mum loves to talk about horses. Just putting it on positive things. And your mum or your dad, they're not just their diagnosis, they are a person. So when we think about more like a systematic approach to care and support needs, framing, you might feel really overwhelmed at that point of time going, oh my God, there's so much I can say. But if you think about what's the 5 most important things that we need to know about your loved one, it can really help. And you can update it. You can update it monthly, quarterly, 6-monthly, whatever might be relevant. But just focusing on those positive aspects initially can really help the older person adjust, them finding things that are in common with other residents, and making those connections based on older people's strengths and abilities rather than their weaknesses.
Fantastic.
FlexiCare is a not-for-profit organisation which supports older people living in Brisbane's southern suburbs to live their best lives in their own homes and communities. FlexiCare don't have grand plans to be the biggest aged care provider. They want to be known for treating each one of their participants as an individual who they get to know well. They answer their phone calls personally when clients ring them. They give their clients easy access to a home care partner who can work with them to deliver the best mix of support possible. If you're in Brisbane South and want to know more, give their friendly team a call on 07 3422 8400 or check out their website, flexi.org.au.
So if a family member, a spouse or an adult child is pursuing this kind of conversation with mum or dad, and yet they're still very resistant, if they are completely lacking that insight that we've touched on, what does a person do? What does the spouse, typically from our experience, what can the adult child do? What can they sort of say to, perhaps they can say nothing. I'm not really sure, but what is your experience and what would you suggest if mum or dad or perhaps both of them are completely resistant to going into supported care or residential accommodation, and you can actually see that big crisis is about to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that it reminds me of this case. Like years ago, I met this lady who was in a retirement village and she absolutely refused to go into residential care. Interestingly, the facility was actually on site. She lived in a retirement village. The facility was on site where she lived. And her two daughters were beside themselves. And they were like, Mum needs to go up the road to a hostel. She doesn't want to go. And this lady presented beautifully. And she was very kind, generous. I'd come over. She's like, I'll make you a cup of tea. On surface, it all looked amazing. But Coral, then I realized she was making a cup of tea and the milk expired 2 weeks ago and the mugs were dirty. And I allowed her to make a cup of tea. I didn't drink it, but she wanted to show me how hospital she was.
Yes.
And I could really see that there was problems. And in hindsight, actually, her dementia was quite advanced. So that insight was really impaired because she couldn't actually see how much she deteriorated. So then I realized that her conversations were actually all the same.
Yes.
And she couldn't tell me what she had for dinner last night. She couldn't tell me when she last saw the doctor. She couldn't tell me what she was doing next week. And I actually think that if those daughters spoke with mum 6 months prior, her admission would have gone a lot better. So what happened was this lady was moved into hostel without her agreement to it. The daughters were power of attorney. They could do all that. And mum would run out of the facility because it was not a locked facility. And then so she was putting herself in more risks because she was trying to go back into her hostel and she was packing her bags, leaving. It was really stressful. And the daughters were beside themselves. Mum was really upset. And so unfortunately, in that case, this person missed out on an opportunity to live in a hostel and assimilate with other residents and ended up moving into a secure unit. So I think that sometimes when things get too far and too complicated, it's more stressful for all parties.
Yes.
And not having everyone on the same page can result. And look, I'm not trying to get your listeners upset, but it can result in the older person then deciding that the only way they can assert themselves is by refusing to eat, refusing to shower, and feeling that that's the only thing that they can control. And this is why I think it's great that we're doing this episode. And I'm hoping that your listeners, that they're not quite at that stage, whether it's earlier on, and that they can communicate with their loved one about, no, these are the risks with you being at home, involving the medical team, as I said, like talking to GPs, making appointments, getting more team approach to this. So it's not just about, hey, I'm the daughter who wants to move my mum into care, that the concerns are across the board. And so that the older person can see that the safest option for them and their health at that point of time is supported accommodation. And I think that more we can preempt those discussions and involvement, the better outcome it can be for all parties. But it's so hard if we just ignore it for so long and go, oh, we're not going to talk about it, and the older person's health declines, then they don't want to go. They don't realize and they can't see that actually that there are any benefits for them moving into care.
It's so interesting. What you've just said is kind of like what I say when I'm talking to people about accepting in-home care. And I always say preparation is key. And don't leave it until the crisis happens. So what I'm hearing loud and clear is have those conversations earlier. And it's not just one conversation. It's a number of gentle and compassionate kind of conversations that will lead you. And when that situation makes itself clear, then it's not a surprise to the older person. And it's like, hey, Mum, I think we might have reached this point. We've talked about this for the last 6 months, for the last year. Not dissimilar to advanced care planning or having an AHD, an advanced health directive, is talking about it and understanding what the person wants. And then when you reach that point, I think it's probably an easier step. But look, even if you, like looking upon my own situation with my mum, and we kept Dad at home with his dementia and he died at home. And for me, I would love to keep Mum at home, but I still acknowledge that my mum's getting a lot of support right now. And my sisters and I are at the point where we actually can't give any more support. We have a private carer come in on top of her home care package, support workers. And I know that at that point where, and again, I'm very positive and I look at the positive aspects of whatever, that I would feel some guilt and some sadness about helping Mum make that transition into residential accommodation. So is there, people ask us this as well, is there, and I know you work in this space and certainly your website, aptly titled Wise Care, will be in the show notes of this episode, but is there support out there for families, spouses, adult children to debrief, to talk about this, to help them kind of come to terms or accept that it's okay that Mum or Dad have reached this point and need to go into residential accommodation?
There is a lot of support out there, and I think that sometimes it's hard for people to know where to go and where to find help and support. And sometimes people might think that they don't have time for support, they don't have money for support, they don't have energy for support, that they don't want to unpack it. Sometimes there could be issues from early on in their life and that they feel maybe Mum or Dad helped them so much earlier on and that they just can't process that emotionally at that point of time. There are associations relevant to different diseases like Parkinson's Association, Alzheimer's Australia, or Dementia Australia, or there's Dementia Support Services. There's different agencies, but I think, Coral, what's really important is for the family member to take a step back and just to think, what is their gut feeling telling them at that point of time that would help them the most? I think that, and I've been talking about this so much this year, just to go, what would help me right now? And sometimes it might not be connecting with other people who have a loved one who has dementia. Sometimes it might not be necessarily about talking to others who moved into aged care. Sometimes it's just, I just want to be seen and heard and understood. And it could be about reaching out to a counsellor and having some counselling sessions to debrief. Sometimes it could be like, you know what, I really just need to look after myself. I'm going to pick up swimming again and I'll start doing my 10,000 steps a day. But just seeing what actually works for you, because not everyone needs to necessarily reach out for psychological support. Some family members might be experiencing burnout and maybe they're not sleeping well, they've got insomnia. And so once we fix those issues, they can actually feel better. So there's different supports available. I know that Flinders University offers free support. I know that also there's support through, I will put it in show notes, Swinburne University down in Victoria. They offer telehealth for residents of aged care, but also for families and for workers. So that's free confidential counselling. A lot of families can also just go to the GP, get a mental health care plan and connect with a local psychologist. Doesn't mean that you have to have anxiety or depression. Care burnout is real. And if you want to talk to someone, you can do it that way. There's lots of Facebook groups that you can join if you want to connect with another. It's not going to fix your personal problem. So I think it really depends on what is the person struggling with most at that point of time and approaching it from that point of view. Like, what would help you most? What outcome would you love most? Is it about connecting with others? Is it about finding time for yourself? Is it about treating if you have sleep disorder, if you have, if you're feeling really stressed and overwhelmed, how can you create a healthy pathway for your own well-being? It's just teasing apart what's going on. I don't want everyone to think, I need to see a psychologist or I need to speak to someone. It really is so individualized. couple of
Yes.
nursing homes that I've visited in Sydney, they did have monthly meetings for the families as well. And they found that quite beneficial and useful. It might work in some cases, but in some it might not. So it really depends on what's going on for the individual. Yeah. Sorry, I hope that's helpful. I guess it really depends. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Look, it's obviously individual and case by case, and what works for one person or what one person is seeking is not going to be what the next person needs or wants as well. So certainly a
Yeah.
tough situation, but I think I agree with you there. I guess you have to reflect on what it is you're seeking and source what's going to be most appropriate to your personal situation.
Yes.
Julie, what
And I
about the older person themselves? Like, that's the huge life change. Well, there's some people, if they've been talking it through and the older person acknowledges it's time and makes the move, that's probably going to be a positive experience. But people who have been resistant to that, perhaps they've been in that crisis and they've gone from hospital to residential care, is very traumatic. And, you know, it's a space, I've mentioned this, that we don't work in, but what we hear from people is anxiety and then mood disorders, depression. What could be available to an older person to help them adjust or accept that big situation? Because I just can't think of anything more kind of traumatic. I use that word, but, you know, from having an event, perhaps it's been a significant fall and going to hospital and then going from hospital into residential care, like so big. What could support the older person in that situation?
Look, we know that people in residential care are at high risk of developing poor mental health, and research indicates that up to 50% or 1 in 2 would experience symptoms of depression, and anxiety is a lot more common than depression. And we know that physical health can definitely impact how a person is feeling. So what can help older people when they move into care is really connecting with others, not isolating themselves in rooms, organising for family when they come to see their loved one to take them out of the room, do the visit on the balcony, go out in nature, look for what's on the program for the day. Can family help and facilitate that so that the older person is not spending prolonged times by themselves? What we know is that the more the person is isolated, the worse their mental health will be. Antidepressants alone are not going to fix how a person feels if they remain isolated. We've learned through COVID just how deadly the impact of isolation and
Yes.
is on older people and all age groups, how much we all struggled being physically removed from others. So I think that just looking for opportunities, what would help an older person have meals out of their room, connect with others, join activities, go on outings would definitely improve their well-being. And I know even last week when I was in an aged care facility, an elder said to me, "Oh, but you know, like I'm so comfortable in my room." And I said, "I know, but I want you to be a little bit uncomfortable. I want you to feel something a bit different," because, you know, her son visits her every week and they always sit in that room and they just chat away. And it's like, well, yes, I know that you're really comfortable with it, but you know, there's horses in a paddock next door to the facility. Go and look at that. It's spring. So many trees are flowering right now. Come and experience that. There's not so much you can do in an air-conditioned room. And I think that physically moving to looking at nature is good for her health because she's moving, blood is flowing through her body. She's got something new to talk about. She's going to come across staff and other residents to say hello to. And I think that the more we help older person assimilate in that environment, the better outcome that will be for them as well.
They're fantastic tips. So simple, hey?
Yeah.
And achievable.
We overthink them and we think we don't have time, we don't have money. But I think that, yeah, like the more we come to attention of staff and go, oh, yeah, this is what we like. Yes, I'd love to do do bingo, do exercise or something like that. We can do it. And the family knows their loved ones so much, and they know what their worries and anxieties are. Maybe they'll be like, oh, initially, I don't want to join dining room. It's too noisy. There's too many people. But if they form friendships with people at their table, next time they'll invite them, come on, time to come to the dining room. So just looking for little things like that and having family support and guide that process can help so much. Yeah.
Julie, I'm a person that has a very positive and encouraging kind of approach to aging and aging well. And I'd love to conclude this episode on that positive note. Can you recall perhaps a situation where there was some resistance and it was difficult for the family supporting mum to move into residential accommodation, and then actually it turned out okay and it became a positive experience for the older person and the family?
Oh, I have so many positive stories, Coral, and not just moving in dad as well. There's been, I can think of several cases. One specific one where this lady was a little bit hesitant about coming in and if she would be okay with food and if she'd be comfortable with her room. And I really encouraged the daughters to come in and look at the program of what was going on in the facility, help mum join those activities, even though there was a little bit of resistance. And that lady just adjusted so well because it was done so well and collaboratively. She was reassured by staff. And so she took great pride in how she dressed and what she did each day. And she made really great friendships. And I know that when I was writing my first book, I referenced her a lot in the book because it was really helpful to see just from someone who was getting so upset and disappointed about the move to actually making some amazing friendships in that facility, connecting with others. Because the reality for this lady was when she was living at home, she was becoming more and more isolated and she didn't have many friends that she could see and talk to. And she just got a completely new lease on life and she started making beautiful cards. And then she actually became part of the welcoming committee. So when other residents moved into care, she was the one who was actually helping them adjust as well. And I think that that's really a great example of how that collaboration and working together not only helped that family, but helped so many families as well.
That's a fantastic story. I love that.
There you go. Maybe your mom could become part of the welcoming committee if she ends up in care.
You know, you've already made me feel a little lighter, actually, about should this time come for my mum and should we all realise we're at that point. Just in that case that you said, I do actually feel better about it. So thank you. So supporting an older loved one move from their own home into residential accommodation is a task that often takes an emotional toll on all family members involved. Sometimes the move can be planned when the older person themselves acknowledges it's time to make the move, but more often this significant life change is done during a crisis when there's been a big change in the older person's health, such as a series of falls resulting in a hospital admission. In a perfect world, we'd all be having these conversations with our older loved ones well in advance of the situation arising. But it doesn't happen like that for many families. Mum and dad can be very resistant to leaving the family home and moving into supported accommodation. Julie, you've given our listeners some fantastic advice about how to approach this kind of conversation. If anyone wants to follow up with you, is this okay?
Absolutely, no problem. More than happy to be connected with your listeners.
Wonderful. Well, look, we will have your contact details in the show notes. And certainly, I think your book is on your website as well.
Yes,
isn't it?
so I'm just finishing with the editor is my second book, Beyond Unexpected Changes in Late Life. So that covers residential and community care. My first book about residential care is on my website. So if you just share the link to wisecare.com.au, that would be much appreciated.
Absolutely. And congratulations. It's such a big task, publishing a book. And here you are about to publish your second one. So congratulations on that, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Coral, for having me.
Listeners, until next week, take care.
Hey Care community, thanks for listening to this episode. So you never miss a show, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. If you'd like to know more about what we do, head to our website, cmeacn.com.au.